Well, hey, book lovers, welcome back to another of our celebrity interviews. I am so incredibly excited because today we're hanging out with a dear friend of ours. You met him at Mermagicon in February when we hung out on location. Today we're talking to Philo Barnhart. He is an animator and creator, and he's done all sorts of amazing things. Philo, how are you today?
I'm doing very well.
I'm
How
so
are
excited
you?
to see you. I'm doing so good. I've been waiting all day for this interview. I know my fans have too. And if you're joining us live, drop your questions. We're going to get them answered while we're on air. And if you're on our replay, we'll answer as many as we can in the comments the next couple of days and weeks. So go ahead and drop your questions down below. Philo, can you introduce yourself and tell us some of the projects you've worked on?
Yes, well, my name is Philo Barnhart, and I've spent most of my career working in the business of animation, starting with television shows like the Smurfs, and way back when Godzilla, and Super Friends, and just a whole bunch of fun shows that people may remember. They sometimes run on Cartoon Network nowadays in reruns, so you can still catch them. And worked on a number of movies, mostly animated. Um, had one live action film at the start, and that was Star Trek the Motion Picture. But I'm most remembered for things like The Secret of NIMH, and later The Little Mermaid for Disney, and Beauty and the Beast, which
And
was my
I'm
last one.
so excited because I grew up on all of these movies. I adore them. And we did get to chat a little bit about some of these movies at Mermagicon. We're going to go over some really cool stories today. We're going to answer some fan questions and we're going to have all the fun while we are hanging out today. For those of you who are new to me, I'm KM Robinson. I'm the author of the Siren War Saga, and we are hanging out talking with animator Philo Barnhart today as we talk all about The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast. We're going to be talking about The Secret of NIMH and all the movies that Philo has worked on before. So let's jump in. If you've got questions, go ahead and drop those for us. Danielle is excited. She's here saying, can't wait. And Melanie is joining us as well, saying, good evening. Good evening, Mel. We're excited to see you here. If you guys have
Yay!
questions for Philo, go ahead and let us know. I want to dive in and let's go off the word dive here. Let's talk about The Little Mermaid first. So you worked on The Little Mermaid, one of my all-time favorite movies. Tell us who specifically you worked on.
Well, they weren't ready for me to work on Ariel yet when I first arrived. We were waiting on Daniel Haskett, great animator and product development person who was living in New York at the time. So until he arrived, they put me on developing Ursula with Rob Minkoff. So that was my first assignment on the film. And traditionally in animation, you do your strongest sequences first. Um, in that way, I guess it's kind of like composing a book or any piece of work where there's writing involved. And you try to get your best story points nailed down first, and then the rest of the story can kind of fall into place. You just build things a piece at a time. It's a lot easier that way. But we started actually with Ariel asking the sea witch for her legs and making the deal and so on. So there was that one, and also when she saves Eric from drowning, that was our second most important sequence. And the third was the one that Glenn Keane pretty much handled on his own, and that was Part of Your World, the song that really drives the entire thing. That's her main song of yearning, and Glenn traditionally gets a sequence all to himself in every film that he does. So that was his.
That was his.
And the funny thing was that Jeffrey Katzenberg was thinking of cutting the song from the film because kids in previews were getting fidgety, and he thought, okay, it's boring, it's out. But Glenn especially fought like mad, and it stayed in. So thank goodness, because that's
Because
the whole
that's
crux,
everyone's
whole crux of the
favorite
thing.
part, that wonderful song.
Yeah, yeah.
Alexis is joining us in the comments. She wants to know from The Little Mermaid, which was your favorite character to work on?
Oh, from Little Mermaid. Well, initially Ursula, and she still has a special place in my heart. She was a lot of fun to develop.
Now I have to ask,
And we
what made you guys go with purple for Ursula?
It's actually kind of a grayed down purple. It got more intense. They do what they call keying, color keying of the characters, depending on the density of the background. So when she was against a darker background, then it got a little deeper in color. But you'll notice that it's more like a periwinkle blue at times. There's more grayed down. So, of course, by the time we got to consumer products years later, which was my next job with Disney, we went full blown purple. Um, Never should have gone that way, but it's okay. But it was never intended to be that purple. But that's the explanation I can give.
That's so interesting.
Hmm.
So out of all of the characters that you've worked on, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Secret of NIMH, which is your all-time favorite?
Um, as far as the movies, yeah, that would be Secret of NIMH, which for the very fact that I learned everything I needed to know about full animation. Up till then, I'd only done the television animation, which is much more limited. Hopefully not in its appeal, but in the way it's made. Um, you have separate torsos on a character, you have separate arms, separate mouths, separate eyes, separate everything, and everything is cycled. So it's an economical way to do a TV show. And plus, a lot of that gets turned into what they call stock footage. So if somebody needs a scene that's very similar, they'll just go to the stock bin and look through all the scenes and say, "Oh, I'll just make a new exposure sheet using this stock scene," and they'll re-expose the dialogue and everything, so it's suitable for their scene.
That's so
So
interesting.
full
I love
animation,
that.
yeah, full animation is different though, and I immediately had to start learning what I was doing because I took their test initially to get into the studio. They had just left Disney to set up their own studio around the time they were making Fox and the Hound. And Don took everyone that had been working on Banjo the Woodpile Cat with him to Culver City to his home, and they started making Banjo there. And it sold to HBO, and everyone knew who Don Bluth was overnight. It was just a beautiful film, loaded with the kind of animation from the golden age. Because after Sleeping Beauty, Walt Disney says there's not going to be any more cast shadows under characters, all that extra stuff that went into the making the animation more real for the audience had to be done away with. It was just getting too expensive. And by then they were going to Xerox as a means to get the images onto celluloid. So hand inking went out. It was used sparingly. We even used it on Ariel, on her waist and tail fin lines, and also her lip lines. So what that means is you have to draw everything in black except for the lips and the fin lines, which are all in blue. So they won't Xerox. And then the girls go in and they ink the lines in. So
Oh,
that was still going on, but the killing cost of it did away with all that. We brought it back with Secret of NIMH. So immediately I had to learn how to arc things because my first test, they said, "Well, you're still moving things in parallel lines." And I said, "Well, that's because that's the TV way." I didn't know anything about arcs. Because we move in arcs. Animals move in arcs, people move in arcs, and objects move in arcs. Yeah. When you don't move in an arc, you're maybe a robot that's, moving like this. But we move in an arc. A lot of you may have seen, oh gosh, I'm probably going to get the artist wrong. No, Leonardo da Vinci. I believe it's his. It's a drawing, it's a beautiful drawing of a man with his arms. He's in a circle and his arms are going up and down like this, and his legs are also going in an arc in the circle. It's
mhm.
called Vitruvian Man. If you've never seen it, I recommend you look it up. But that was our drawing of interest, because that he was showing the example of moving in an arc. Otherwise, if you try to move your legs apart, you're just going to go down. But he has the man's legs swinging up, so in the circle. Yeah.
Right.
So there was all that stuff you had to, keep in your mind. And I remember Gary Goldman giving us a pep talk before dailies. Dailies are the film footage that you watch every Friday together to see how the progress is going on your film, or whatever you're happening to work on. The video games, whatever it was we were doing. And he says, it's often been said that doing animation is like trying to keep 50 pennies spinning at one time. That's kind of what it is. You have a lot to keep track of. It's not just the art, it's the technical stuff that's going on in your head. You can actually wear out faster from the mental energy that you expend in the day than anything physical you're doing.
I believe that.
Yeah, boy, talk about tired. Yeah, that's a different kind of tired. I'm sure a lot of you out there know what I'm talking about.
We do have a lot of artists that hang out with us, and I believe that they will agree with that. But I know for me, as a photographer and as a writer, that mental ability to do all these things, that's exhausting. I get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you can't really make people understand it unless it happens to them. So.
Unless you don't get it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, hey, if you're joining us live, we are hanging out with Philo Barnhart. He is the most amazing animator and creator. He's worked with Disney. He's done Secret of NIMH, all sorts of movies that we know and love. If you've got questions for us while we're live today, go ahead and drop those down below. If you're on our replay, we will get as many answered in the comments over the next couple of days and weeks as possible. So go ahead and leave us all of the love. And if you're having fun, do us a favor. Give us a shout out. Let your friends know that we are hanging out live and bring them to the party so they don't miss out on the fun. All right, we're jumping back in. We're talking about The Little Mermaid right now. And before we move on, I do have one question I want to ask. The last time we hung out, you actually mentioned that you were the one to design Ariel's bra clasp. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I had to come up with an overall bra for her because Jeffrey Katzenberg was more than a little upset at dailies one Friday because one of Dan's early scenes had her in seashell pasties. We had just started trying to make her move, and it was Mark Henn, Dan Haskett, and myself. And Dan came up with a seashell pasty scene, and it was tasteful enough, but because it wasn't joined, together.
Yes.
He thought he'd have a little fun and show that there was underwater current with the bus line. So that got to Jeffrey Katzenberg, and he had a word with the directors after the dailies. I could hear it outside where I was working because we hadn't moved into the other half of the building yet. We just moved over from the trailers we started in, and they were starting to shift the Oliver and Company people around to make room for us. So we started in a half of the building that had been uninhabited for a while, and there were no offices. So I was sitting in the hallway with my desk right outside the director's room, and I could hear voices raising, and finally the door opened and Jeffrey came out very quietly and walked up to me, and he was red in the face still. And he said, so Philo, what are you doing for lunch today? I said, well, Jeffrey, I think I'm going to be eating. How about you? He says, no, you're not. You're going to try your best to give me a seashell brassiere and have it ready after lunch. Do you think you can do that? I said, sure. Because you don't tell Jeffrey no. I had met him 10 years earlier on Star Trek, and I just learned you don't tell him no. He's a good man, but you don't tell him no. So he says, we're making white bread here. I said, yeah, I understand that. It's got to stay G-rated. So he said, please try not to make it look like a bullseye, if you know what I mean. I said, okay. So I put the shells together in a way initially that the lines weren't meeting at the center. They were slightly off. And it also helps with dimension too, because you can run into what they call tangents, where things intersect and they go flat all of a sudden, because suddenly they're not describing a shape anymore. So there was all that to think about. But I just gave her a simple strap, and the clasp wasn't going to be seen very much. In fact, it's probably seen only a couple of times in the film uh, when all is said and done. But I went ahead and put one in there anyway, because most of the time her hair would cover it. So it's just like a little starfish shape. There's really nothing to it. And a couple people put it in. But that's how that happened. Yeah, it's actually
That's
a very
great.
simple story.
I love it. I love it. And I see that you're actually representing your mermaid love today with your shirt. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, yes, yes. This is we acquired this shirt at the last Toyman show we were at in
Lucky,
St. Louis.
Philo.
Yes, Charles is saying I'm lucky because
I was going to get it, but I
he was
didn't
going to
make
get it, but I got it. But I know the lady now, and we're going to get him one too. So it'll all be good. Yeah,
Fantastic. So the next time we
Yeah.
hang out, you guys are going to be twins. I love it.
yeah. And anyone else that wants one, I'll make sure you get her information.
Ah, fantastic. Hey, guys, if you want mermaid shirts, we've got the
Yeah,
connection. We've
she's
got a lot of
wonderful.
fabulous people hanging out with us today. Alyssa says that is so cool. Amy, our mutual friend, is here hanging out. She says hello, and that you have the best clothing. She actually hadn't heard your stories about the suits that we talked about at Mermagicon. So real quick, can you tell
Oh
us
yeah.
about those fancy suits you have?
Yes, it was too warm for those today, I'm afraid. So I apologize, but yeah, I got the idea. Well, several years ago, before I left California, as a matter of fact, I got the idea to get a unique suit made from 100% cotton print. That's the best thing to make a suit out of because it'll breathe. You know, you don't want to bake to death in your
Right.
garment. So I got tropical fish patterns, actual photographs of fish underwater, and they were so cool. They're still in storage in California. I've got to get out there and get my things. But I also got, yeah, you think?
Gotta go funky.
I also got some hieroglyphs, Egyptian hieroglyphs. They were, modern prints, but they were done just like the walls of an Egyptian temple and stuff. So I was thinking way back then, long before the movies were made, that I'd love to get a custom suit made out of all this stuff. And was learning to sew myself at the time and was making my own Renaissance costumes for the Renaissance Pleasure Fair in California. That's where all the fairs began, was in California. Now they're all nationwide, and they're like a franchise now. So I'm not surprised. They're wonderful. Anyway, I'm digressing, but out here in Illinois, I bought some material. I found the Beauty and the Beast stained glass patterns from the opening and the closing of the film. The closing of the film, you might remember, is her with the restored prince.
Yeah.
Not the prince, but the prince waltzing with her, blonde Adam, or whatever his name was, who was formerly the Beast. So that's in there, and also when the Enchantress is turning him into the Beast, and she's offering him the rose, and all those icons from the opening of the film. So beautiful pattern. People have made all kinds of things out of it. And the other one was just a galaxy print for when I do science fiction conventions. So I took that fabric with me to China when I did a convention in Shanghai. And we went to what's called the Bund, which is the harbor area of Shanghai. It has this wonderful buildings. It looks like you're in Blade Runner, the movie. And that's their garment district down there. So our friend took us to a tailor he knew of, and they made my suits. So I've had them ever since. It's been a couple of years now. Yeah.
And I was so impressed with your suits at Mermagicon. I flipped when I saw the Galaxy suit, but I was in love with that Beauty and the Beast suit because Beauty and the Beast is one of my all-time favorites. And I'd actually like to get into that because I know you spent a little time working on Beauty and the Beast as well. So tell us about your involvement with that one.
Well, by then I was working in Florida. We'd just done Roller Coaster Rabbit and also Rescuers Down Under, which we did with California, in simultaneously. And the fun thing was they threw wrap parties for each studio. The one in Florida, California got its own wrap party. We actually caused some jealousy when we had our Mermaid one out there in '89 because we had a better party. We had food and they didn't have any food. In fact, our chefs on the soundstage out there were dressed like Chef Louis with the artificial mustaches and the chef hats,
That's
And it was
amazing.
just a lot of fun. We went all night long, and it was great. Jody came out to see us, Jody Benson and Howard Ashman. I think Alan Menken was there too. I didn't see much of him, but I saw a lot of Howard, Jody. But when we got around to doing Beauty and the Beast, we kind of chose up sides. It's like playing in a ball game at school. So Alex Cooperschmidt wanted me with him on Gaston, and we were going to be handling the storming of the castle, leading up to the storming of the castle, and the actual storming of the castle sequence. We were going to be handling that in Florida for the most part. So we were all assigned, certain parts. And in addition to Gaston, I also did a lot of Lumiere in that sequence. Might remember the scene where he goes to the window and says, "Sacre bleu, encroaches."
Yes.
That's one of mine. I also did a little footstool for that sequence, and a couple of this is old age. I'm blanking out on Cogsworth. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cogsworth. A couple of scenes of him. He took a while to draw. Lumiere was not that hard to draw compared to the clock.
Cogsworth has a lot of detail on him.
Well, yeah, it's the little scrolly things and the squared off feet and stuff. The Lumiere was a lot more fun because he's all circles. So he's much more lyrical, and you can get away with a lot of squash and stretch on him. Not so much with Cogsworth because of the technical qualities. He is a clock, after all. We couldn't stretch him too much.
Right.
So, but Gaston was a challenge too because sometimes we drew him too puny, and he had to be massive.
Yes. Muscle.
We just had to go back. We had to go back and redraw him because he wasn't big enough. He wasn't a side of beef yet. So, but we started rewriting all the words to that song, and I can't repeat it here because it's just too naughty. But we do that to blow off steam. We do that in every film. We rewrite the songs. Don't get us wrong, we love them. It was just to blow off steam because you have to do something after a while. It's very labor intensive, and you can go nuts if you don't have something to listen to or to blow that off.
I understand that, especially with all the little details you have to work on with animation.
Yeah, well, being a writer, you understand that. Yeah,
I do.
Yeah, you've got to have some kind of downtime where you can just be silly and not have to think about things.
Absolutely. I love going in and talking to my friend fans behind the scenes and messing up some of my storylines. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
That's so much fun. So I know that you've worked on so many great movies. I know you've got a lot of them we're going to be chatting about. I real quick want to talk about The Rescuers Down Under, and then we're going to get into your favorite. So how were you involved with The Rescuers Down Under?
Oh, well, that was simple. We just were going to be involved again on certain sequences, and we got a lot of them to do on that film. Some of the flying scenes were done out there in Florida, and I got to draw Marahute, who was a beautiful character. did a lot of Cody, renaming him Codeine after a while. Again, to blow off steam. The same reason I called Nicodemus in Secret of NIMH Nick Odious. But that's another story. But you know, they're beloved by us, but it is intensive, and
Yes.
there was always something going wrong with that kid's face, and so it's as bad as trying to keep the princesses pretty. You know, you have to go back and make him as cute as you possibly can. So we would draw and redraw the stuff, and that's been going on since Snow White was new. You know, the first film that Walt Disney ever made. That's just the way the art form is. If it's not working, you have to go back and do it over. Do over. So my friend Jeff Patch, who's worked on so many films at different studios with me as the editor, Bluth, Filmation, Disney, you know, all over the place. He's a wonderful editor. He's retired now, but he used to tell me, crop it, flop it, or drop it.
That's great.
So we were doing McLeish and Cody and all those dungeon animals. And it was so much fun to do. I got to do a lot of Joanna, too, his pet iguana. She was just so silly. I love that character. I got to do the scene where he grabs her face. Did you know there was a razorback in the truck, Joanna? There was a razorback in the truck! And he was fun to draw, and we were really inspired by George C. Scott, who did the voice for him. So it's one of the lesser-known films that we did, but boy, did we have fun on that. And we had John Candy, too. I did a bit of the Albatross character, but not as much as Cody and McLeish and Joanna. So,
That's fantastic. Okay.
And occasionally Bernard and Bianca, too. A lot of that stuff where they're sitting at the little table, is trying to work up the courage to give her the wedding ring, or the engagement ring.
Yes.
Worked on that sequence quite a bit, too. So.
Fantastic. Ella's in the comments. She absolutely loved Rescuers Down Under. She also mentions that Gaston is roughly the size of an ox, so she understands having to redraw and redraw until he's the correct proportions.
And his hairstyle, too, would get off, so...
Oh, I imagine. Gaston is one of the fun ones. Ella's a friend of mine, and we love going to Disney and hunting down Gaston so we can talk about our books with him. He always has fun things to say.
Uh-huh. Well, especially if it's about him.
Exactly.
I say Gaston's the good guy.
Charles says Gaston's the good guy.
Oh, is he?
He's trying to protect the town.
Not in the live-action one, he's not.
This girl's kidnapped. I mean, think about it.
We'll have
In the live-action one.
We'll have another conversation, friends, where we have Charles and Philo on to discuss the merits of Gaston.
Yeah. In the live-action one, he was pretty scummy.
He was.
He was pretty evil.
He was.
He tied poor Maurice to the log and left him for the wolves.
No, dreadful.
Not nice.
No.
Not nice. No.
All right. So we've mentioned a couple of the Disney films that you have worked on, but you've also worked on things outside of Disney as well. And we've mentioned that you worked on Secret of NIMH. Now, in preparation for today's interview, I actually watched it this week. So let's dive in. Let's talk about Secret of NIMH. How did you get involved? Which characters did you work on? What do we need to know?
Pretty much I worked on all of them. All the characters.
Okay.
There were only three of us. There were only three people keying the entire movie. And that was myself, Vera Lanfer, now Vera Pacheco, and Emily Giuliano, and whose husband, Joe Giuliano, made all the models for the film. He was also our main cameraman for shooting the animation. But he made the most extraordinary models of the canal boats that the rats are in. He made miniature sets. He made the underwater elevator that was made out of a lantern. He
Yeah.
made the birdcage that Mrs. Brisby gets trapped in towards the end of the film. He made
Okay.
the contraption that they're trying to move the block, which is actually her home. He made that, and it all worked. He went on to
Wow.
make the models for the Dragon's Lair, Space Ace, and Dragon's Lair 2, the Time Warp games that we did after NIMH. But as I said before, I learned a great deal about how full animation works and how timing works. Timing, that is the very movement of the characters, has a lot to do with both the drawings and the way that you expose them, how long you expose them, um, how close together the drawings are. They can be farther apart when they need to be so that you're favoring one action over another from extreme to extreme. Um, so you might be doing a quarter move, say my arm is here, then it's here. Well, it might be charted to just move a quarter of the way so that it moves. Well, the more drawings you pile on to one end, it slows the action in or it slows it out. So there's slow in, slow out, fast in, fast out, everything in between. So uh, in between, that's the name of one of the jobs. Breakdown is another. The extremes are what carry the scene, and those would be the ones that we would key, and then we would pass off to our other assistants. We had a group of people that would just focus on one or two characters for the entire movie. So we had a whole army of people that we would pass off to. So we were just cranking the stuff out very carefully, but cranking it out nevertheless, because it was our first film, and we were excited because we were learning new things, how to expose things all over again, how to put shadows back into the characters, and nowadays they do that by backwinding the film in the camera and shooting it again, the same strip of film at a different exposure rate. So we would shoot our solid shadows at 30%, and when you got the film developed, it looked like there was a see-through shadow being cast under the character. So they're
Wow.
actually animated solid. So that was all stuff we had to think about. And like Gary Goldman said, it's like trying to keep 50 pennies spinning at once because you're really trying to pay attention to the timing and where the lines are going. You're trying not to do what we call zippity doo dah lines that don't describe anything. They're just kind of.
That's
That's
the
what
best
Don
way to
Bluth called them. Don Bluth says, no zippity doo dah lines. And I said, what in the hell are zippity doo dah lines? So I got a good education. But Don was great fun to work with. He knew exactly what he wanted to see on the screen. He would do about 5x7 sheets of these beautiful storyboards that had the backgrounds already worked out in his mind. They were on the paper, how things were going to move within that scene. And he would just pass those off to Larry Leaker, who did all the layouts. Larry was our only layout guy. And all those beautiful interiors of the Owl's Tree, that all came from Don and Larry working together. And it was just a great setting for that sequence. That was also the first sequence that we tackled. And so every single one of those owls went through me.
Wow.
All of them. They went through me, literally, pow. But we had some trying days because there was a lot of what we call pencil mileage on those characters. They were
Sure.
animals, so they had lots of fur endings and things that frayed, and you had to keep track of those things when they moved through
Oh,
space. You
yeah.
couldn't let them breathe. You know what's called
Right.
breathing. They have to be solid and appear to be normally flowing.
Mhm.
Even something you might think as simple as Mrs. Brisby's cape. There are all kinds of secondary motions on her cape. If you look at the film again, you'll see she may stop moving, but her cape keeps going. And
Right.
in real life, our clothing and our hair keeps moving even when we stop or we change direction. It goes another equal and opposite direction. So that's all stuff you have to keep in mind while you're doing this. So, and most of the time it's charted out by the main animators over on the side of the drawing in blue, so it won't Xerox up later. But it's easy enough to follow along once you learn how to read those things and how to read the exposure sheet and match everything up. So.
That's amazing. I know we have a number of artists hanging out with us. They're going to be checking out the replay as well. So later in today's episode, we're actually going to be asking for some artist advice for them. But before we get there, we have a couple more movies I want to touch on. Anything else we need to know about Secret of NIMH before we move on?
Just that it was a wonderful experience, and we got to get Jerry Goldsmith back. I seen him during Star Trek, and he did another great evocative score for us for Secret of NIMH, and I miss him very much. There's beautiful music. So
fantastic. Well, I had a ball watching it this week, and I'm definitely gonna have to go back and watch for those little things now. So I'm very excited for that. But I know you.
And you can also hear my voice in there too.
wait, back up. What?
I did a lot of voices in there too, a lot of rats.
Did you? I didn't realize that.
The one you can hear the most is, you can hear some of my rats in the debate sequence early on in the film. Okay. I changed it slightly here and there for different rats, but the one you can hear especially is at the end when the block is sinking, and she says, it's sinking, just in the block, it's sinking.
And I think we're having a little bit of technical difficulties here. Philo, if you can hear me, I am unable to hear you. We might need you to refresh your feed. But if you are joining us live, we would love to get your questions answered. So go ahead and drop those down.
Are you there?
Hey, we're back. We got you.
Okay.
All right. So we did cut out right as we got to the point where we were going to hear your line. So the block is sinking, and then what?
We're trying to just technical difficulties. We're trying to get your sound up again.
Hey, can
Testing
you
1 2?
Can you hear me?
Are you there? No, hold on. I
think you turn the speaker on.
No, I'm gonna bounce out and bounce back in again.
All right. Well, we are having just a little bit of technical difficulties. We are going to get Philo back in just a second. But until then, we are still going to be talking about Philo's work on An American Tail. We're going to be talking about Happily Ever After, which was a Snow White continuation that I watched back in the day. We're going to be chatting about his work on Winnie the Pooh and A Day for Eeyore. We're going to be talking about his work on the Smurfs and Star Trek as well. So we are jumping back into our conversation with Philo. How are you doing, Philo?
Okay, we had somebody call on the phone.
What happened?
But it's been taken care of.
Yeah. He won an Emmy Award for his work on Pinky and the Brain and Animaniacs, so that's something for you later.
Yeah.
Oh, I did not know that. That's awesome. You were telling us a story about your voice being in Secret of NIMH. We got to the part where we heard that the cinder block was sinking. So what happened then?
Then you'll hear a rat say, throw the line, Justin. That's me.
That's awesome. I love it.
But it's not in the dubbed versions that you'll see in foreign countries, because I guess it can't be heard that well.
That's so funny. And I know that this isn't the only movie you've actually been in. Back when you were a child, you were in one of our favorites, weren't you?
Yes. That was my consolation prize for losing the part of Christopher Robin in the first Winnie the Pooh. I was up for the part. Bruce Reitherman and I were the final runners-up out of 150 little boys that auditioned, so I was very proud of that. and I had my final audition with Sterling Holloway. And Walt Disney himself told me a bit more about Christopher Robin. I was perfecting my accent and everything, to get that part of it right. But I didn't really understand the character. I was only 7 and wasn't really able to get a hold of some of the concepts. So he explained who Christopher Robin was. I thought that was great, and
Yeah.
so excited. And then he'd heard that I lost the part to Willie's son, Bruce Reitherman. Probably a little nepotism, but he did say felt he could work better with his own son. So who am I to say? So I was pretty devastated. You know how kids are.
Sure.
But my dad came home, a little while later, and he says, "Well, um, Walt has asked us if we want to be extras in the fly a kite sequence that's shooting, in a little while, for which Dad had done the storyboards. He started his storyboards where they're still in the house, and Mr. Banks comes out, and you see his hat has been damaged, and he's holding the mended kite. And from that point on, my father did the storyboards for the film. He also designed the tea party on the ceiling and some other things. But only department heads in those days got credits, so you won't see my father's name or come to that, my name on the film. But there we were flying our kite. We're in a couple of shots where some of the atmosphere people that are in the park, adjacent to the Banks home on Cherry Tree Lane, and it was a lot of fun. It was on the biggest soundstage on the Disney lot. I can't remember the number of it now. It was probably stage 2, I think. But they've also shot things like Armageddon and some other stuff there, Pirates of the Caribbean, when they need a big space to build caverns and surface of planets and things like they did for Armageddon. That's the soundstage they use. So this represented the park and then all the fronts of the homes. And they made it look like it was outside by the Klieg lights that we had to use for Technicolor in those days. And boy, those things were hot. So people would sweat their makeup off in just a few seconds. But rather than turn the lights off in between takes, they would just open the soundstage doors and let it air out for a few minutes, maybe 15 minutes. And then they would go again. They'd shut the doors, and we would, the director would call playback action, and we'd start again. So this went on for several days, and our kites were actually strings that were attached to the soundstage ceiling. Sorry. And we had color coded so that we knew where our string was. We could walk it back to our place on the sidewalk and get started after we got our costumes on. So
That's so fun. So the next time you watch Mary Poppins, make sure you look for young Philo and his father.
We're in front of the houses, right by a street lamp. In fact, I leaned on the street lamp for the second shot, and my father's carrying the kite back to me. So you'll probably see us. We're like dead center if you're seeing a letterbox version of the movie. So
that's so awesome. I love it. And I know your parents actually worked with Disney as well.
Yes,
That is so amazing. I love that you've got stories from all of those older movies as well. Any well-known ones that we should know about real fast?
Oh, pretty much my parents touched everything. Well, my mother ended her career for a little while to raise our family in 1947 or 8 when she just finished working on Song of the South, and then she went to have my brother, my oldest brother, and start raising our family. So she was out of it until the 60s, and then she re-entered at different studios, to Patty Freeling, Filmation, so on, Hanna-Barbera with me. Um, but Dad was there from 44 to around 71 or 2, I think, when they did Aristocats was his last film. And he was there through Walt Disney's passing. And that was very rough on everyone, because
I'm
they
sure.
honestly didn't know what was going to happen with
Right.
the studio at that point. So, Walt was the guiding light of the whole thing, and suddenly he was gone. But he was savvy enough to set up some things before he passed away. So those things were secretly in place, and they're still going strong today. But he met my mother in 44. She'd started in 42. And he was discharged from the war honorably because he was a sleepwalker. So he almost went over. He was a very good marksman, and he was teaching people to use anti-aircraft guns and coast artillery in Chile during World War II.
Wow.
But he was also prone to sleepwalking. So an MP caught him around the waist outside just before he went over the cliffs where they were stationed there.
Wow.
And he could have been crashed all over the rocks down there in the ocean. So, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. So we sent him back to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and he remained there for a couple of years. And then his friend John Freeman called him in Cedar Rapids and said, I'm at Disney now. I'm animating. I really think you ought to get on a train and come on out here with your samples and meet Walt and think about joining us. So there he was, and the rest is history.
That's amazing. I love it. And it's a tradition passed down through you as well. And I know you've done so much work on so many movies. We've got a couple more I want to touch on while we're hanging out this evening. But if you're joining us live and you have questions for Philo, get those in now. We're going to get them answered in the next couple of minutes. And Philo, I want to change gears just a little bit. I know that the last time we chatted, you mentioned you worked just a little bit on one of my favorite movies, An American Tale. So what happened there?
I spent about 3 weeks on that. That they really hadn't gotten rolling yet. We were just doing experimental things. They ended up pretty much the way we did them in the film later in full color. My mother actually joined the production after I left and did cell painting as she had before on The Secret of NIMH. So I actually did 3 or 4 movies with my mom that way, where she was in the ink and paint department. But yeah, that was it was the opening sequence. We were actually kind of working chronologically, where they were stormed by the cat sacks, I guess they were called. The cats with the furry hats, Cossack hats, driven out of their home. And I did a lot of scenes of Fievel, pretty much just trying to get away from the cats. And he falls down in the snow, and his mother says, "Are you okay?" And she says, "Don't ever do that again." And he just shakes his head. He didn't really say anything, but that was the end result of 3 weeks. But they were only paying at that point. It was because Spielberg was just starting us off, and they didn't have their budget entirely in place yet, and they were only able to pay us by the foot of film. And anyone knows about filmmaking, that is really a grind, because the quality of the animation, it's often on ones, which means one drawing for one frame of film. There's 24 frames of film through the projector every second. So you can see how much work that becomes. Now, granted, the standard is usually we'll shoot 12 drawings to make the 24 frames, and we'll shoot them twice to get our 24 frames of motion. And it all has to do, with the technical quality of the scene. Each scene is different. So these were very painstaking. They had to be on ones. And so making a living off that scene frightened me, to be honest. I think I only made $118
Oh, wow.
in 3 weeks, and my rent was coming due. So I had remembered that Bob Singer back at Hanna-Barbera had said, if things fall apart for you there, give me a call and we'll bring you back to doing character models here at Hanna-Barbera. I said, thank you, Bob. I appreciate it. So there I was calling him, and he said, can you start Monday? So I made my apologies to Don and all, but they got the film done, and it was beautiful. And my mother really enjoyed working on it, too. So there was no animosity. It was all good. But I was able to cover my bills and carry on with life. So I
Which
was
is the
happy.
important part.
And I did a couple more seasons of Smurfs, which was wonderful. I started with them, and something called Galtor and the Golden Lance. So, and then I went on to do main titles for Gem and the Holograms, the TV show. So you got to see my stuff every week at the beginning of the show.
That's
All that stuff where she's got her microphone and
yes.
Gem is my name, no one else is the same. Gem is my name. Truly outrageous.
I love it.
Contagious.
So let's backtrack just a tiny bit. You mentioned that you worked on the Smurfs. Tell me about your time with that.
Oh, that was a lot of fun. I thought, what in the world are we going to do to improve these? They were already so cute. From the he's a Belgian creator, Belgian artist. I can't remember his name now. Forgive me, but he developed the Smurfs and several storybooks, and he made an agreement with Hanna-Barbera to do the show, and so we had in mind the psychology of the circle, which works for Mickey Mouse also. Most of your squeaky clean, good hero characters are mostly circles and fleshy type characters. You try to reserve angles and things for, well, most of your stylized characters, but mostly angles and things are reserved for villains. Villains, yeah. So it's the age-old thing. Should a villain look bad or be bad or both? In the case of somebody like Gaston, of course, he's very handsome and appealing, but he's bad. So that's a case in point. But someone like Maleficent, Sleeping Beauty, is all angles. Of course, the other characters were all angles too. So you needed maybe a guidebook to say, well, Aurora has angles too. What the heck? So we just decided to go all circles, like with Mickey. This is what Mickey's big appeal is. In fact, in the early days when they were first animating him, they used a quarter to trace off his head and 2 dimes to trace off his ears. And they were always set at an angle when he was in profile,
Right.
To work that way. Mm-hmm. So they don't work in perspective. They never were supposed to. So it's just part of the style of Mickey Mouse. But so we used all the circles that this Belgian artist had done, and even used kind of the Mickey formula for drawing the circle for their head, and simple circles for noses, and circles of the eyes. Everything was circles. So they were a lot easier to do than some of the other characters we had. Galtor on the Golden Lance was more like, say, Johnny Quest or the Super Friends, which take a little longer to draw, since they look exactly like real people, or you hope that they do.
Yes.
Yeah. It's amusing because Godzilla, a lot of the people that were just beginning in the business, that was their proving ground, was that series, and they just could not handle the drafting of the people. So there's a lot of funky looking shows early on in the season, but eventually they got it together, and you know, got it worked out, and we all had long careers.
Which is a very good thing. I know that you mentioned earlier that you were almost Christopher Robin, and I know later in
Yes.
your career you actually got to work on Winnie the Pooh and A Day for Eeyore. Now, I'm obsessed with Winnie the Pooh, so please tell me all the details.
Well, my father actually told me about that one. He had been responsible for spearheading a lot of the backgrounds on all the featurettes, starting with the first one, and I believe that was the Honey Tree, if I'm not mistaken. That was the one I was up for, and then all the subsequent ones, Ticker 2, the Blustery Day, all of those things. And it came around to, we had a subcontractor named Rick Reinert, who was a wonderful animator in his own right. And at his facility is where we got set up to do that. They didn't have room for us at Disney, so we would report for work there. And I was assigned Eeyore and Tigger, and sometimes Pooh, sometimes Rabbit, and sometimes Roo. Actually, I did a lot of Roo, and a lot of Eeyore too. That was his film, so.
Oh.
And there was a lot of drawing involved in that, actually. So that was fun. Plus, I got to work with my father on something for a change.
That's so nice. I love that you have that family connection and you get to actually work on projects with your parents. It's really cool to hear those stories. All right. Anything else I need to know about Winnie the Pooh?
Just that it was a lot of fun, and it was in between the video games that we were doing at Bluth's. We had done Dragon's Lair, then we had a break, and a lot of us from Bluth's went to work for Rick on A Day for Eeyore. And then right back to Bluth's on Space Ace. So
Fabulous. I love it.
Then after that, I went on to Black Cauldron for Disney, and that was, by then it was 1984. So yeah.
Fantastic. What do we need to know about Black Cauldron?
Well, what would you like to know? Which characters I worked on, or
Yes.
Yeah. Mostly I was assigned to Princess Ilanwi, but I would get some scenes of her with Taran. I did a few of Fluter Flam and Gurgi together. I just peppered throughout the film. I was actually on the last 9 months of it. They had been in production for a total of 10 years at that point.
Wow.
Very much like Sleeping Beauty, which was my dad's experience. And he worked on Sleeping Beauty for 6 years out of the 10. But I was only on Cauldron for 9 months. So, but it was a good experience. I knew it was going to be pretty different for... I knew they were trying to do something different, especially with their rating. And sadly, a lot of people didn't understand that in the public,
Right.
because they were dropping their kids off to the theaters, like always, picking them up later, and here they were picking up their kids traumatized. And why the theaters let the kids in there when they were underage, I don't know. But what happened was we got raked over the coals by the film critics for that one.
Right.
And that was never our intention. It had a PG-13 rating or something like PG probably at the time. But we thought everyone understood that, and it kind of killed the chances for the film.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, I remember one critic, David Sheehan, saying, the Return to Oz film that Disney has made and also their Black Cauldron are kiddie horror films you'll want to keep your kids away from. And I said, that's it. That's all she wrote. But that had a beautiful score, actually, too, by Elmer Bernstein. And he was wonderful. Another one of my favorite film composers.
Fantastic.
And, you can actually find that on iTunes still.
Oh, can you?
Yeah.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, it's a pretty grand score. It's very epic.
Fantastic.
Because it is a sword and sorcery story.
Right.
It's based on two of the books from the Chronicles of Prydain. Something of Six is one of the titles, and The Black Cauldron, of course, is the other one.
Sure. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be much help with that title.
Yeah, I think that was that Lloyd Alexander, Charles?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was Lloyd Alexander's books. But there are about 6 of them, I believe, 6 or 7. And they were all called the Chronicles of Prydain. So.
Okay. Things to look up after the show, friends.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all on the internet at your disposal. So.
Yeah.
Internet, beautiful things.
Actually, Disney is planning to make a live-action television series out of the books. So
really?
they're going to tackle them again. Yeah, the last I heard, they were still thinking about it. Yeah, it's one of their things they have on their back burner.
Well, there you go, guys. Now we know.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to switch gears just a little bit. There is a movie that I watched when I was a kid. I haven't seen it in years, but I watched it this week in preparation. I know you worked on Happily Ever After, which is kind of an extension of Snow White's story. So what was your involvement with that one?
Initially, character design, and that followed closely on the heels of Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night, which was Filmation's re-entry into the feature film part of their business. They're famous for their television shows, of course, like Brave Star, He-Man, Masters of the Universe, Bill Cosby, and Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, those things. But they started to delve into the features again, starting with Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night, and for which James Earl Jones did the voice of the Emperor. Good choice. He's always good as the bad guys.
Oh, yes.
He really made that character. His character was very scary. He was a bunch of hands with a cloak and a scary mask that was floating around. So he wasn't really like embodied normally. He was just a phantom. So we went right into the Snow White Happily Ever After, and Irene Cara did her voice, so I started working on the girl and doing head turnarounds and body turnarounds to show people how she might be drawn, and started doing rough sample scenes. We had an actress play the part on film, and we did a bit of rotoscoping and then cartooned it up from there. Most of what we use reference for is not verbatim tracing. We'll use it as a guide for how people actually move, and it's just a way to make it more realistic and enhance the animation. So, but someone, say like Bakshi, would actually trace the things off and maybe cartoon it up a little bit, trace it off the live action film. But we actually push it a little farther from what's actually filmed, because you don't want the actor to dictate what you're doing with your own scenes. So there's no fun in that. So
True.
Exaggeration is at the heart of animation. So right after I was done getting her developed, I went into layout for a while on the film and worked with 2 or 3 other people doing layouts for the entire film, and then into assistant animation again. And then I got my first opportunity to animate on that film. The director, John Howley, says, "How'd you like to take some, I know you work hard all day Philo, but how would you like to take some animation of your own home to do on the movie?" I said, "In a freelance." I said, "Wow, you know, um, yes, I would be up to the challenge." So I got to do a lot of the scenes of her, and from scratch, no live action to follow, and still kind of proud of them today. And again, I learned a lot by doing that, and um, it came out better than my Gem and the Holograms titles.
That's so fun.
Uh,
I love it. I love that you're involved in all of these things that so many of my fans grew up with. I grew up with, and I just love these behind the scenes stories. I know we've actually got some questions that have come in before the show and now while we're live. So we're going to switch gears just a tiny bit before we get to your advice for aspiring artists. Amy is in the comments. She says, "Didn't you once tell me that you worked on Star Trek?" And I know I have a good friend, an author friend, Lisa, who is dying to hear about how you got to work with Star Trek. So tell us what we need to know.
okay, well, my good friend John Kimball, having an old age moment again. John Kimball, God bless him. He was a young animator at Hanna-Barbera, whose father was Ward Kimball, the longtime Disney animator, one of the 9 old men at Walt Disney Studio. And John was working with me at Hanna-Barbera, and he took a sabbatical to go work towards the end of 1979 on Star Trek, because his friend Bob Swarth was running part of the art department on the film. Everything was done by hand on the films back then. We had no CG computer graphics to use. Everything was generated by hand, and it was practical effects. There were lighting effects that these men designed. They also designed films that were projected into the rear of the set to make the view screens. So there were no real monitors, no computer monitors. That all had to be faked in, because we didn't have those things yet. We didn't even have home computers yet. So he had been working there a couple weeks, and he had, unbeknownst to me, he had already called my friends Daryl McNeil and Judy Niver to come work there. So they took some time off from Hanna-Barbera, and they went over. And he ended up calling me, and he says, we need another person. Would you like to come take some time off from Hanna-Barbera and come join us? I said, "Oh, that would be fabulous. I love the show, as you know." He says, "Yes, I know. That's why I thought of you." So he says, "There's just one thing." I said, "And what's that?" And he says, "You'll have to supply your own desk. Do you have one?" I said, "Yes, I do. I had purchased an extra from Hanna-Barbera years before, so I had that." So they came from Paramount and picked up my desk and took it out to Marina Del Rey, down by the beach. So we were at Marina Del Rey, where all the boats and the boat people live. And the first day I got there, it was interesting. I said, "Well, this seems to be the address, but it's a boat repair house." It was like it's like an auto garage, where they repair your car, but there were boats in there, and it smelled like brine, from the ocean. And so I thought, this is different. There were 2 other facilities around the corner from there. On Glencoe Avenue, there was a facility, and also one on Maxella Avenue, all in Marina Del Rey, within walking distance. And so we were able to go from building to building if we needed to help them build models or put fiber optics into the miniature sets or whatever. When we weren't doing animation, we'd go help them out for a while, because the chips were down and they had to deliver to the theaters at a certain amount of time. So we were working around the clock. We were even spending the night. in the studio. I'm digressing again. But lo and behold, there was an art department above the boat repair house. And so that's where we worked. And my desk was out in the hallway again. I seem to end up in the hallway a lot.
You
But it's
do.
because the rooms were so tiny. Judy and Daryl and John were already in the animation room. So I just sat right outside the door. And I would wear headphones a lot of the time. And the day I met, I'm looking at Buddy. The day I met Douglas Trumbull, who was our main supervisor, and I was in awe of him because he designed the special effects and executed the special effects for 2001: A Space Odyssey. Another great love of mine from my childhood. Here I was working with him. It was just tremendous. So I was drawing away with my headphones. I realized somebody was leaning over, watching me very closely with his hands clasped behind his back. And I did the biggest double take because it was him watching me draw. And he says, "Oh, I'm just so fascinated with what you're doing." He says, "I actually love the hand-drawn animation." And I said, "Oh, really?" So that's how I met him. It was like my first week there. But just had a great time. It was a lot of work, and it was fast and furious. And a lot of it was fast and dirty, but we got it done. So, but spending the night there on those big stairs was interesting because we'd take our sleeping bags, set the alarm, we'd sleep for a while, and then the alarm would go off. We'd go let somebody else go have a nap, and then we would blob film or make mats or whatever we had to do. So
That's amazing. I love it.
But we had to come up with some interesting ways to generate cloud shapes and things. One way was by using a wire hanger that was bent into weird shapes and then spun. And that became the clouds you see in the opening of the film. They were turned, the still photos were turned into what are called Codolith cells. It was a Kodak product. They're like acetates like we use for regular animation. And they're punched at the bottom for animation. But they are a photo process. So our black lines would turn clear, and the white paper or the white background would turn jet black. So, and if when you shine the light through that, if there was anything showing through that you didn't want, you just had to simply paint it out. We did a lot of our star fields the very same way. All the star fields you see in the film were generated by hand and then just filmed right in the camera, backlit. The camera would zoom in on the art to make it look like you were moving through the stars. So those pieces of art were pulled over themselves, and it makes kind of a shimmery cloud pattern. If you look closely at the film next time you watch it, you'll see that it's like a little generated cloud pattern that's shimmering. And then, of course, over that is the models of the Klingon ships approaching. So
That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
I love these behind the scenes. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and all of your stories today.
Sure, there's a lot of stories about that, but we can't really do that right now.
We are
It's a
right
6-hour
about
interview.
we're right about at
It
the
would be a
end
6-hour
of our
interview.
interview. But I do want to ask, what advice do you have for artists who want to get involved in the same area that you're in?
Don't. Run. Become an accountant.
Don't, Charles says, become an accountant. Well, I've still found, especially when I'm teaching animation now, and I do that frequently, I still recommend learning it by hand initially, and then from there you can apply it to any format of animation that you want. A lot of times people would go right into digital animation and they would ask my opinion of how can I get this movement to be more snappy, or and I said, well, try it on paper. I know that sounds silly to you, but try it on paper. It's the very same thing that Brad Bird had people do when he had them start animating on The Incredibles, his creation done at Pixar, which became a huge hit. He had the animators for the first time, they put down their mouse or their stylus, and they picked up a pencil, and they tried these different kinds of timing with just the paper and pencil and the way they exposed things. And they got savvy enough to put that timing into the digital stuff. The digital stuff will just kind of meander and be very smooth and just flow from one thing to the next without any snappy popping, action. So that is something that I recommend is trying it by hand first. There are a number of ways, a number of programs you can use to digitally film your animation. You can actually draw right into the computer too, using Cintiqs and different methods these days. I find that's a little harder to control volumes and things on the characters because I still have, since I'm so old school, I still have a kind of a disconnect with what's happening on the screen to what I'm drawing down here in front of me. So I'm kind of a hands-on person. I like to do it directly on the paper instead of onto the computer. So, but
That does make sense.
what you should try to do is go out and sketch reality. Go out and do gesture drawings of people and their attitudes and the way they behave, the way they move. Check their secondary motions, the way their hair moves when they're walking, when they're playing a ball game, when they're eating, when they're sleeping. Check out body attitudes. Do gesture poses. They don't have to look like much of anything. Just get the feeling of that pose. Get it down as quickly as you can. Your drawings don't have to be perfect initially. That's not how animation works generally. Generally, I could show you some really rough scenes that most people start there, and some of them stop there too. They depend on their assistant to actually draft out the character. But the main guts of the scene is there. The feeling. You go for the feeling first. You try not to worry too much about details. Use as much shorthand as you can develop on drafting that character and move on to your next pose. Do a stack of poses, maybe 3 to 5 to 7 drawings for what your character is going to be doing through that entire scene, and then break it down between those a little at a time. You can actually kind of go off on a tangent between each pose if you want. There's any number of things you can do. Just give it a try. Also, try to purchase the book, The Animator Survival Kit by Richard Williams. That has become the Bible of our industry. And any kind of timing or drafting you can possibly imagine, and every kind of format is covered in that book. So you can learn a lot from that book, and it's like the Bible. You can read a passage that you absolutely need at the time that you need it.
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
All right.
And just keep drawing, and that'll make if you're going to end up doing digital, that'll make your digital animation that much better.
Fantastic. I actually have an artist friend who lives fairly near to you. I'm going to have to connect you guys because I feel like she can learn an awful lot from you and get her hooked up with one of your classes. So we will be in touch on that. If you guys would like to hang out with Philo, you will be able to get all the information on his website, which we're going to get to in just a little bit. But before we say goodbye, we've got just a couple more things we need to do. If you're watching us live or on our rebroadcast, if you have a celebrity you would like to see on the show, go ahead and tag them in the comments now and tell me why you want them on the show. That helps me to know why you would like to hang out with them here on our live broadcast interviews, and it helps them to know why you're tagging them in the post. So make sure you let me know who you'd love to see on the show and why you would love to see them there. Now, Philo, I know you're working on a couple of projects right now. Before we say goodbye to you, what are you working on?
Firstly, I'm working on some projects with my friend Charles D. Moissant. He's here in the room with me right now. He's taking a little rest.
And if you did not catch Charles' episode of Young Adult Edition a few weeks ago, make sure you go back on our YouTube or Facebook page and check out his episode of Young Adult Edition.
Oh, very
Check
good.
out the Kickstarter.
Oh, yes, he has a Kickstarter. That is for the Heap. Is that correct, Charles?
Yeah.
He has a Kickstarter for the Heap, which is his new book, and I'm continuing work on Whispers from the Void, which is a group of women. They call themselves Team Monster, and in their universe, all monsters are represented by the 7 deadly sins. So it's a very interesting project, and the characters are actually very delightful. I know that it sounds heinous to have monsters that you're rooting for, but it's actually kind of fun. And a mutual friend of ours has also been writing a stage show, musical. That's it's rather like an rock opera, and he's gotten us involved with that. He's been writing it, I believe, since the 80s, and it's called Beasties, and there is a Patreon page for that coming up. There isn't a lot there yet, so perhaps I'll let you know when there's more to see about that too. And keep us in mind for Whispers from the Void too. That's going to be coming eventually.
Fantastic. Well, Philo, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. We appreciate all of your stories, all of your insight, your great advice. We always love having you on the show, and we cannot wait to have you back very, very soon to talk all about your projects and the upcoming things that you are working on. And fingers crossed, we're going to hang out at some more conventions in the not-too-distant future. Before we go, can you let everybody know where they can find you online?
Yes, you can find us at silverphoenix.net, and you need the net to catch the bird. So again, it's Silver Phoenix, all one word, .net.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Philo. I appreciate you being on. And to those of you joining us, thank you so much for hanging out today for our celebrity interview. As always, you can come join us on our Facebook Live broadcast to hang out with authors, bookish people, and celebrities as we do these live Q&A sessions. And of course, you can come hang out at kmrobinsonbooks.com and at kmrobinsonbooks on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, IGTV, YouTube, and all the other fun social media platforms. And if you loved today's episode and you want to do something like this too, I have a little bonus for you. If you are a fan of running your own talk shows, tomorrow I have an exclusive free limited time mini training where I'm breaking down everything you need to know on how to run a live broadcast talk show 101. It is a totally free training for you. You can actually go early to talkshow.kmrobinson.com. That's not books, kmrobinson.com. It's my social media marketing training platform, not my author page. And check out our broadcast on how to do live broadcasting talk show 101. And you can learn more over at kmrobinson.com for that as well. Philo, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate you being here. We will talk again soon. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see ya. Bye-bye.